Dear guests, dear participants of this event, please take your seats. We'll be happy if you sit closer to us. Please sit closer, and in a few minutes we can start. Good morning to everyone. Europe Without Barriers, it's a public organization which conducts international debates. Ukrainian forced and labor migration to EU countries, current situation and potential. As you know, our organization traditionally is in charge of the visa-free area. We were one of the think tanks which from the very beginning of the visa simplification, visa liberalization, has been conducting advocacy and analytical activity to enable Ukrainian citizens to be able to travel to the EU countries without visas. It's not deliberately we scheduled this event, and I'm happy. It's like some symbolism. We can see that today in Brussels, in the EU, the final statement will be made in terms of introduction of visa-free regime for Ukrainian citizens, and we'll allow ourselves to state that this final statement will be positive. And in fact, we are expecting that this June, we Ukrainians will be traveling without visas. So, this perfect opportunity to be happy, sincerely, that Ukrainians not always are able to get happy to their successes, but in the area of European integration, it's, I would say, a practical history of success. It's, I would say, the only specific one, and this history of success will have to evidently keep for many years, as we would face or experience certain challenges towards it. We'll be discussing this issue as well, but in this context of this visa-free regime, we would like to discuss what could be the trends of Ukrainian forced and labor migration. In the context that the changes are quite, lots of changes are being made in Ukraine. So we have the Ukrainian crisis in this country, and there is lots of uncompleted reforms still pending. We still don't have successful combating corruption, so we have lots of challenges. And today we would like to discuss how these challenges impact on the labor force and labor migration areas, not only to the EU countries, but today our focus will be mainly on the EU and, in general, to look at the situation and to recall the earlier popular directions to Russia. In order to have today's discussion successful and active and fruitful, we invited the leading Ukrainian experts who are with us today. We also invited the experts from the EU countries, namely from Visegrad countries. I would like to welcome the colleagues from Poland and Czech Republic. And the Czech Republic, they will be able to make a speech. I would like to say that our today's discussion is designed on the results of international survey conducted in 2015-2016. And Marta Yaрошevich, who is among us, and Dushan Дрбохлав, the initiators and the authors of this survey. Europe Without Barriers was one of the partners of this survey. We've got quite interesting results, as at that time the focus of our attention was what's mobility of internally displaced persons in the context of visa-free prospects. And at that time, we had the international team of experts. We unanimously stated that the serious challenges and moreover threats we didn't have at that time. Did the situation change as of today? That's why we would like to ask our colleagues and to give us overlook from Visegrad countries, how it looks like today. Besides, we invited the representatives from academic institutions who have their own opinions, who are continuously dealing with these issues, and they will give us their expert forecasts. Will the Ukrainian citizens leaving for the EU countries in a large scale after the visa-free regime will be launched? Perhaps there will be the risks or the myths. Whether the huge migration flows will be launched. It's important for us not from the point of view that it's important to understand whether we Ukrainians, as normally they say, we can lose the brains, the intellectual potential, and labor migration. But it's an issue whether we can lose the visa-free regime. But I would like to remind to everyone that the EU, before it made the key decision on visa-free regime, they introduced the termination of the visa-free regime, focused on migration issues and migration risks. If these migration risks become reality, then any country member of the EU will have the right to terminate, to suspend this visa-free regime. So you can see the issues we are going to discuss today. They are extremely important for us from different practical points of view. So today we have such agenda. Analyst of our organization, Katerina Kульчицька, produced the policy briefing. So Katerina will give you the general overview, the presentation. What are the trends? What are the expectations? Not only from the point of view of labor migration, but in terms of asylum policy, illegal migration, and afterwards we'll listen to the point of view of our colleagues, as I mentioned earlier. Then we will be able to hear what is the migration to Russia from our Ukrainian colleagues. And later on, we'll have the open discussion. We are interested in maximizing time for exchange of views. I know that they're quite reputable and knowledgeable experts in front of me, and I will be happy to hear your views, your opinions. I apologize that our room is not like the classical round table. Every one of you who wish will get the floor. And with these words, I would like to conclude. When I mentioned that today's roundtable became possible thanks to the primary survey conducted, thanks to Visegrad Foundation support, today we have an opportunity to discuss these updated trends in the migration policy area, thanks to Renaissance Foundation and the Embassy of Sweden to Ukraine, which supported this initiative. They consider it extremely important. If there's representatives or reputable donors, so we urge them to our fruitful discussion. In my welcoming speech, I would like to mention that, to emphasize that Europe without barriers traditionally tries to support these constructive and working relations with the concerned governmental institutions. And today we invited many our colleagues from the State Migration Service of Ukraine and from other institutions. If I'm not mistaken, the deputy head of the State Employment Service joined us today, Sergei Kravchenko. And I would like to invite Sergei Kravchenko for welcoming speech. First of all, I'd like to thank for invitation. And thanks for inviting experts. I can see Marta here. I've heard a lot about her, that she's involved in migration policy issues. I would like to see the experience of Poland, as Poland is our neighbor, which faced the problematic migration when the Polish people traveled to other countries to make money in large scale. I know that the people from certain countries, they traveled to Poland. I would like this experience to borrow and to introduce in Ukraine. But today we have quite complicated situation. 1.7 million are internally displaced people. Where these people are, which countries they travel to, and that's an issue. It's a pressing need, and we have the illegal labor migration. Only 1% of people are getting employed through official mediators. We, as a State Employment Service, started implementing such a project, awareness raising of people for employment abroad, to explain people what the people should have to travel abroad. The contract, insurance policy, he should have all rights to travel to the country to get employed. As for today, the topic is, subject is to involve labor migrants in Hungary, in Slovak Republic, in Poland. It became such an employment proposal on the labor market. Those agencies in Ukraine who were traveling, who were dealing with travels, they started dealing with labor issues. Those people, there is a situation when people who decided to leave, they become getting cheated. And as I know, Poland took measures that at the border with Poland, you can be asked where you're going to, and if you show it, if it's not proved by an employer in Poland, then you can be refused in entry. I would like that our joint efforts to be taken. And next factor is social protection of our citizens and lots of families who left Ukraine and afterwards they return, they don't have any social protection, social insurance, they don't pension, pensions, and this issue should be raised as well. As migration is, and it always will be. And we can recall that from 18th century, the labor resources started to get involved from other countries to more developed countries. And I can give you an example. In South Korea, they built the city of future, and they involve the labor migrants, but the new potential IT people, bankers, the people who have new vision, they're ready to develop innovations. So this process is continuous. Therefore, we recommend, and the State Employment Service launched the project, the Center of Entrepreneurship Development. Many people who traveled abroad when they made money, and after return to Ukraine, they don't know where to spend this money. In Western Ukraine, we can see one of the examples. They built houses. Why are you building huge houses for 500 or 600 meters? They don't know where to invest money to. In Poland, they invested in the infrastructure of small and medium entrepreneurship. One of the examples is Zakopane. They invested lots of money. They invested in human resources, as I know. It was visited by 3 million tourists. Today, as an example, I give an example of Western Ukraine, where you can develop the service and infrastructure in order to have tourists coming over. Therefore, I invite you for cooperation and for discussions. This topic is extremely important and pressing. It has to be raised. First of all, it's social protection of those people who leave and those people who return. Thank you very much for your such a practical and valuable overview to the issue. And I believe that after these welcome speeches, we can move to our practical part of the presentation, and afterwards we can discuss it. Now, I would like to give the floor to Katerina Kульchicьka. Thank you very much, Irina. Taking an opportunity, I would like to welcome all Ukrainians with obtaining, from the point of view of European Parliament, the free visa-free regime. This visa-free regime will come into force on June 11th, and we'll be able to use it. However, at the stage of preparation to launch a visa-free regime was combined with the suspension of this regime. It includes a number of indicators. They will be observed by EU countries. They will be statistically measured in order to understand whether Ukraine remains safe neighbor of the EU. In case of very considerable material increase on several indicators, really one or several countries of EU, will have an opportunity to initiate the start of implementation of the mechanism of the visa-free regime suspension. And I would like to present the results of our survey, Europe Without Barriers. This survey was done during the last several months together with Ірина Сушко, and we paid attention to those indicators which will be surveyed by the EU, and the members of the EU will be controlled, and under which, in case of negative factors, we can lose this visa-free regime. How this regime will influence on migration flows, whether Ukraine will be able to keep this regime immediately after the regime is launched and onwards. So one of the first indicators to be controlled is the indicator of number of people with non-regulated status. The persons who are within the EU countries, illegal overstayers. If to see in general about migration of Ukrainians to EU countries, there is a number of fixed illegal overstayers. It's a small number compared to a large number of persons who use legal methods of migration, who receive who obtain relevant national visas or resident permits. At the end of 2016, more than 1 million permits for Ukrainian citizens were issued for remunerated activities, for employment. If we compare such number of visas in 2016, Ukrainian citizens obtained more than 1 million visas, 1.3 million Schengen visas. These 27,000 revealed Ukrainians, illegal overstayers on the territory of EU countries, is the peanuts. What's more important, that a considerable number of persons have been recorded in the process of voluntary return to Ukraine. They were figures, they were recorded by border frontiers. We really believe that once the visa liberalization is introduced, this number of illegal overstayers will increase. It will take place not only because several Ukrainian citizens will continue their respective practice, but currently we can observe, and we'd like to state that the level of informing of Ukrainian citizens about the rules of visa-free regime is not very high. According to the last research of Kyiv Institute of Sociology in March 2017, among respondents, only 1/3 of respondents were unable to respond to the question how much time they are allowed to stay in the EU countries. Each citizen of Ukraine using biometrical passport have the right to stay not more than 90 days, and this 90 days for 180 days unfortunately is unknown to most of respondents of Ukraine, as it was as of March 2017. I'd like to note that almost half of respondents of this survey believed that they will stay in UA more than 90 days. They believe that they will stay there for 6 months. It doesn't meet the rules of visa-free regime. If this practice continues, it will be the risky situation for Ukraine in the context of maintaining this visa-free regime. Now I'd like to move to the next indicator, which is quite important, very interesting for the representatives of other countries. They are asylum seekers in Ukraine after the military Russian aggression in the east of Ukraine, annexation of Crimea, and consequent economic crisis. The number of asylum seekers to EU member states considerably increased in 2014-15. But using the available statistical data, I would like to say that this influx of Ukrainian asylum countries came less in 2016. We know that it's 43% less applications were registered compared to 2015. We started thinking why this number decreased using the survey we are going to present with Czech and Polish experts. The opinions were made. The migration from Ukraine is influenced by the economic factors. Economic factors like economic crisis, reduction of wages, salaries, and such factors as military conflict, as military situation and crisis, they accompany, they support the additional new motives, but they're not the main ones. If we are talking about the result of survey about internally displaced people, we reveal that really those determining factors who push asylum seekers from their place of residence, their military conflict, when the people seek the new, choose the new place abroad, they use the economic factors. Considering the fact that economic situation in Ukraine started improving a bit, and we have a bit fragile, existing fragile still regime of peace. Now the decreased number of asylum seekers from Ukraine could be influenced by this existing fragile regime of peace. The factor that most of asylum seekers to the EU, they refused during the applications. 75% of all decisions they contained refusal, and this share of refusals increases. In 2015 it was 70%. Now in 2016 this share of refusals is 75%. If we look at this situation from other angle, some Ukrainian citizens can prove in the EU that have the right for asylum. In 2016, 490 persons of Ukrainian citizens granted received the refugee status. More than half of all positive decisions was issued in Italy. If we are talking about impact of visa-free regime on these statistics, on this flow of asylum seekers, in our view, this influence can have both positive factors, decrease of number of asylum seekers, as some citizens of Ukraine, they took this opportunity as an opportunity to protect themselves. I'm talking about economic migrants, about labor migrants. In such a way, they tried to stay for several more months for the time of consideration of the applications. However, this visa-free regime will give an opportunity for certain citizens not to get employed, but to stay there for 9 months, for 3 months. But on the other hand, this trend is observed as in 2016. So visa-free regime possibly will synergically influence on that. If we are talking about less favorable factor, certain persons, internally displaced persons, who didn't have an opportunity and money, funds and time to spend for visas with a visa-free regime, having a biometrical passport, they will take an opportunity to travel to EU countries and to file application. And perhaps they had some fear to arrange visas here in Ukraine. So we are talking about citizens who live in eastern and central part of Ukraine. So this visa-free regime can influence on this flow of asylum seekers in such a way that certain people under this regime will be able to enter into EU countries and to file their application for asylum. Such some controversial conclusions. The last thing I'd like to mention, one of the most important is, currently we can see one of the highest risks is refusal of entry. I'm talking about the awareness raising is not very high. If we took the data of the research for March 2017, only 33 of polled knew that biometrical passport gives them preference to enter the EU countries. These people will not take the biometrical passport. They will not take the respective supporting documents proving the purpose of stay, and in case of questions of border frontiers, they will not be able to explain their purpose of travel, and they will be refused an entry. Now there is a myth that under visa regime there was no situations in entry refusals, but if you look at available statistical data, we can see that really such persons existed. In 2016, 23,000 of Ukrainian citizens were refused entry at the Polish border. It was extremely loaded before conflict and after the conflict. I would like to mention that one of the main reasons why Ukrainians were refused, the reasons when the person was unable to explain its purpose to enter into EU, and the person didn't have the respective supporting documents. Under this visa-free regime, this figure of refusals could be increased just because of non-readiness of Ukrainians towards this regime. Therefore, we expect, we hope, and we give the recommendations to the Ukrainian authorities, to our partners in EU, to continue informing the Ukrainians about this visa-free regime, and to make this practice equal for both all parts of Ukraine. For not only for western part of Ukraine, the citizens of which you take more opportunities, and for eastern part, as the people, these citizens have less experience and less opportunities to travel, and they can use this visa-free regime less correctly, increasing statistically these indicators of entry refusal. And the last thing I would like to mention, in view of the fact that economic factors as economic crisis, hryvnia devaluation, and reduction of salary are so far the highest and the most important factors forcing people to leave Ukraine. We believe that the Ukrainian government should, first of all, working on improvement of economic situation. If the situation in Ukraine improves, those people who have the internal displaced status, they will stay within Ukraine. Thank you very much, Katya. We have to keep a certain deadline, and each speaker has about 10 minutes. Please keep this time scale, this deadline. When Katerina specified the recommendations to continue an awareness-raising campaign for governmental representatives, and Europe Without Barriers organization is already conducting this campaign, Travel with Responsibility, and we started this campaign with different regions. I believe that everyone would agree with me that under visa-free regime, the Visegrad countries will be the most popular direction for Ukrainian citizens, as these countries were the first which will face the Ukrainian who will come to these countries without visas. I would like to hear the opinion of our colleagues whether they believe they will face certain issues when whether Ukrainians will use correctly this visa-free regime. And so I would like to give the floor to Dushan Дрбохлав.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me and also for having a chance to cooperate within the project. And I will turn to the book you have at your disposal here. You can take it. But first of all, I have to say I'm a social geographer coming from Prague, from Charles University. I work for the Department of Social Geography and Regional Development. And you know, we worked on this book 1 year ago. It means time is very dynamic, but it doesn't mean that I think results are obsolete. I think we have to keep them in mind, and I will try to summarize in several minutes main results concerning Ukrainians and Czechia in Czechia, and reality and probable future development probably. But let me say that this topic, you know, free visa regime is really topical issue just now. I do understand it. But I must say we switched from studying Ukrainians to studying Moldovans. And I can share with you within discussion probably some experience of free visa regime with Moldovans. It means it might be some sort of, experience which might probably we expect when having Ukrainians. But back to our research, I have to stress that we applied qualitative methods. We have to realize this is not really a representative survey with representative results. We made interviews with experts and migrants, and based on these results, we can arrive at some, we hope, important results. But in terms of representativity, statistical representativity, we cannot speak about it. But it sheds light on some important aspects, and we are convinced that it makes sense. Let me summarize very briefly some important facts. I think what was the main result? What was the main research question? The main question was, what does it mean annexation of Crimea by Russians and the army conflict in Donbass? What does it mean for mobility patterns in Ukraine? Does it mean that we can expect a big wave or massive wave of Ukrainians searching for work in European Union, or what does it mean? In fact, the main result was that we found out that there was the change, especially regarding Poland. I mean, there was in fact quite important increase of migration between Ukraine and Poland. But for example, when speaking about Czechia, there was not at that time there was not, and still I think there was not a great impact of the situation in Ukraine. It means we had some impact, but I would say not so important. I would stress in the very beginning that for example, regarding asylum seekers, imagine Czechia policy is very restrictive, and migrants or asylum seekers know about it. For example, in 2014 we had 1,100 asylum applicants. In 2015 we have 1,500, and the same number in fact last year. It means it's a really small number in comparative perspective. And imagine we had approximately 500, 600 during these 3 years coming from Ukraine. And really minimum of them were successful, got the status. 2 of them last year and 174 in 2015. It means the chance to get asylum being a Ukrainian is very small. By the way, or paradoxically, maybe short-term visa applications went down as compared, for example, 2014 as compared to 2013, from 79,000 to 59,000, and then it went up in 2015 to 67,000. It means, but still, no robust change. We generally have more than 100,000 Ukrainian citizens in our country. The figure has been stabilized more or less. By the way, the highest number was just before the crisis in 2008. It was about 135,000. Since then, it has gone down, but now it has been stabilized more than 100,000, 110,000. It means, again, no robust changes. But what is important, we also were searching for main motives. And we have to say that the war as such was the motive for some of them, but the most important was socio-economic situation. It means not good jobs offered, and of course not good salaries. It means people are searching for higher salaries and for good jobs in European Union and in Czechia. It was quite clear. What was found that conscription is one, it's becoming a very important reason for leaving, for especially young men. They want to leave the country because they are afraid of being taken by the army to serve the army. What also was found out that not only pushes, but we speak in migration about pushes and pulls. Pulls are very important. And what does it mean, pulls, on the Czech side? Especially Slavic culture, for you it's quite interesting destination because of the language, because of the common Slavic culture, tradition. By the way, we have had traditionally Ukrainian migrants in our country since the revolution, and they are quite strong social networks working. It means it must be stressed. Also, what we found out that regarding Ukrainian migration, we call it step-by-step migration. We found out that migration from Ukraine very often is not a direct flight from one point to Czechia or Poland. It's step-by-step migration. For example, from the war zone to Kiev or Kharkov, some other cities, and then after some time, for example, man moves abroad, and then the family will join him after some time. It means it's a sort of step-by-step migration. Also, what was very important to mention that quite clearly to Ukraine, we found out that you have got two Ukraines, eastern part and western part. Eastern part people intend to go and to move to Russia from eastern part of Ukraine, and from western part, traditionally, for example, Zakarpattian region, traditionally they go to westernwards. It was quite clear again and again. Also, what seems to be quite interesting in terms, and quite different from Poland maybe, that Ukrainian migration starts being more permanent. By the way, at this moment, out of this 100,000 Ukrainian migrants, 3/4 they have got permanent residence permit. It's something different, because usually we considered Ukrainian migrants as a typical transnational migrants, you know, going back and forth, circulating between Ukraine and Czechia. It's not valid. It's still here, but as I said, 3/4 they have already had permanent residence permit. It's something quite important. It means people decided to stay for a long time, some of them forever, and one of the signals is that they bring their families to Czechia. Yes, strength of social networks. As I said, it's very important. We found out that when people go to Czechia, they make use of social networks. It means they have already had one family member there, for example, or their friends there, and then they use these contacts for their migration. If they don't have this sort of social networks, they contacted, it's quite interesting, their former employer. It means they made use of their former visits to Czechia, and they contacted former employer, and they succeeded very often, and they went back to be employed by their former employer. It was also interesting that we found out that internet, by the way, became quite important source of information, and very useful information source. It means they can be employed through internet. Also, what we found out, and we have heard it already, that there is a sort of you know the title, or we call it client system. We have mediators, we have agencies, some of them legally working, some of them informally working, and they still, it's quite often that they make use of these agencies, and they are employed through these agents. It has some advantages, and it has disadvantages. They are very often exploited by these mediators. Okay, and now these were maybe and what we found out, that Ukrainians feel that despite Ukrainian language is not so different, it's different from Czech language, of course, but they feel that if they know Czech language more than probably they think, it's quite useful for their integration and for being employed. In fact, they realize that, and this is one of very important factors for successful integration, to know well Czech language. And then we tried, I will finish soon. We tried to collect also some opinions about policy recommendations, and we have, please, I will refer you to the book where full list of various recommendations as to how to improve policies in the given field that they are sketched. And I will finish with three conceptual matters. I think we touched not only practical things and applied things, but also we touched conceptual matters. And I think three matters are quite important. First one, we found out that it's not so easy to differentiate between forced and voluntary migration. It seems to be quite easy to say this is forced and this is voluntary, but it's not true. It's a sort of continuum, and very often you have more forced, or motives connected to forced, but very often you have also a sort of, voluntary in the air. It was one important conclusion. The second one was that due to Ukrainian migration, we found out that differences probably between Visegrad countries are even greater than they were in the beginning. We probably cannot speak about convergence, but about divergence. For example, Poland, they have quite different migration policies than we apply in Czechia, and it's even more over time, also due to Ukrainian migration. And the third conceptual matter concerns, as I said, relationship between short-term and permanent migration. There is a regularity found out that over time, many of those who proclaimed in the very beginning that their migration is short-term, very often after some time, this migration will be changed and they will stay for a longer time, and many of them will stay forever. It means the question is, and Ukrainian migration might be one of the examples in Czechia. It means, again, it's a puzzle to some extent, because we speak about transnational migration. We proclaim there is no need to settle. We will be permanently on the move, but it's rather complicated issue. It's very difficult to generalize. Okay, I would stop here, and of course I am ready to if I know, to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We will have time for discussion for sure. Далі.
Next, I would like to give the floor to Marta Yaрошevich, who is, for a long period of time, is tracing the situation with visa-free regime for Ukraine, and she is a knowledgeable expert in migration area, and Marta represents the country which is a hot destination for Ukrainian citizens. Therefore, I believe that we'll hear some other assessments, and therefore I would like to give the floor to Marta. Thank you very much, Irina. Then I will switch to English. I am unable to mix all languages. It's quite difficult for me.
I will present the results of this, our book that we wrote together with Dushan and Irina for Poland, but maybe also we'll make some update on the migration situation in Poland when it comes to the Ukrainian. So the main idea was to see what is the link between deterioration of security situation, IDP situation, security situation in Ukraine, and migration to Poland. And visa-free regime, we did previously some research, but visa-free regime was not this time our main aim. So what is happening? The situation is like that since 2014, Poland is really observing striking increase in the number of Ukrainian migrants coming to Poland. And I was always cautious to say that it's a, like you say it in Russian, agiotage, right? I was always trying to say that it's a maybe temporary phenomenon. We cannot see to which extent it will continue, but like now we can see for these 2 years, 2014, 2015, and 2016, that is growing. So, for instance, in 2016, we've got the easiest way to get to Poland. It's to receive so-called declaration. It means that it allows to work for 6 months in a year. It's for seasonal work, permission for seasonal work. So in 2016 we had 1.2 million declarations issued to Ukrainian citizens in Poland. It's 60% growth in comparison to 2015, and in 2015 it was 90% growth. So these are like really big numbers. But of course it doesn't mean automatically that all those people came to Poland. They just received the declaration. Number of visas issues was lower, and also the number of the number of people with more long-term residence permit is also lower. So we may say that we've got two patterns. One pattern, this is seasonal migration, which is really big, like dynamics, but we cannot really estimate it, right? Because we don't know methods for now, we don't have instruments. And the second issue is long-term residence migration, and then we've got around 200,000 Ukrainians legally working and staying in Poland. The most, now what we are looking at, these are number of how many Ukrainians have insurance, employment and pension insurance in Poland, and for 2016, and of 2016 it was 260,000 Ukrainians who are paying who are hoping to get pension kind of in the future in Poland, which means that this is the long-term migration. When it comes to the asylum seekers, generally, of course, the growth was very big in 2014, then it got slower in 2015 and 16, around 2,000 Ukrainian citizens are asking for asylum in Poland every year. Before this recognition, as Katerina and Irina mentioned, recognition rate was very low. But last week, 100 Ukrainians received temporary protection in Poland, 100. So now, if this trend continues, the recognition rate will be even 30%. Before it was like 2-3%, right? Okay, and now what it all means and what our research showed. So it showed that yes, we don't know the growth is really huge. And in the book we said that we still don't know whether it's temporary, but for now it seems it's more permanent. I mean, it may finish, but we don't. Now we expect that it will continue for the last 3-5 years. And we don't have instruments now to assess to forecast the possible dynamics, right? And we link it mainly with the economic situation, deterioration of economic situation in Ukraine, with war as well, but not so much as we thought. And we interpreted also, we also assessed that the social networks in Poland, they are so huge that the impact of social networks, the whole, I mean, there is a whole, how should I say, the role of the Ukrainian minority in Poland, and also of the internet, of the intermediaries. So there is Ukrainian society existing next to the Polish society kind of now in Poland, right? And why Poland? The second issue, why Poland? Our research showed that mainly because we cannot, as Poland, compete in terms of wages, right? Wages in Czechia, for instance, are bigger than Ukrainian migrant on average can receive. In Poland, it's around 500 euros on average, as our research shows, so it's not so big. But we think that, first of all, this is legal possibility. So this is the migration policy of Poland that is quite liberal, and also geographical possibilities. And also we can see that the patterns are changing. So we've got two patterns. One pattern, Western Ukrainian migration, which is the reaction to economimic crisis. So, and this is seasonal, and it's still the same. But Eastern Ukrainian migration is temporary. So from those 60,000 Ukrainians paying, let's say, paying pension insurance, mostly they are coming from Eastern or Central Ukraine, not from the Western Ukraine. And this is new because it's a new migration for Poland, and they are less using migration networks, they are more using internet, they are also more insecure in the terms that they think they speak Polish, but they don't speak Polish because, like, Western Ukrainians are more used to Polish. They don't have contacts, they don't know where to refer, and they are easier to be cheated by the employers. So this is I think, yeah, these are the main results, and visa-free regime, we think that there will be a growth, but as I said, we don't have instruments now to assess it. For now, it will be a growth, but you should also remember that Poland is an attractive touristic destination for Ukrainians. So I wouldn't I don't like the discussion when we combine it only migration. Visa-free regime means migration. Now, visa-free regime also means touristic and also means shopping, for instance, in Poland, which is very important for our economy. But of course, Ukrainians, you should understand that Poland is now at the lower level unemployment ever. So yes, Poland needs labor force now, and of course Ukraine is receiving possible sending country, but we are also aware of the demographic problems on Ukraine, and we do, like when we do our forecast, we also look at our destination. It's not so automatic that Ukrainians will be coming to Poland, and as Dushan said, it's step by step migration. Wages are not so big, so there is a possibility that Ukrainian migrants will move further west, to Czechia, to Germany, to other destinations from Poland. Thank you very much.
Дуже дякую, Марто. І, зокрема, за
Thank you very much, Marta, and in particular to the fact that you mentioned that Ukrainians are not only labor migrants, but they're tourists as well. I remember some time ago we've got the discussion in the EU, in the European Commission, that in general the mobility of Ukrainians will be useful for tourist industry of the European Union, and we had certain estimates how the budget of the country would increase. I don't remember these figures, but Marta, it's your institute was engaged in that it could be very benefit for the budget of your country. Thank you very much. Now I would like to give the floor Mr. Alexei Pozniak, who represents the academic institution, the Institute of Demography and Social Research, named after Ptucha of the National Academy of Sciences. We asked you to tell us what are the migration trends to Russia, whether something has changed in this regard. When we're talking about labor migration, first of all, we have to look at the problem and provide with adequate information. In principle, in general, not only in Ukraine, but in the countries with highly developed economy, the migration data are less reliable than the data about other aspects of social and economic development of the society. In Ukraine, as you know, only twice we conducted polls. In 2008, 2012, 8 and 12, and the data of national survey are quite obsolete. They were conducted in other conditions. Secondly, because of the importance, they do not cover all strata of migrants, and they could cover the households who left abroad, and each survey has its own criteria to specify migrants, and the survey of 2008-2012. In the first case, we recorded those who were traveling during the 2-3 years before survey, and during the second one, it means that the persons who left abroad to work many years before survey, and since that time they didn't return Ukraine. Such persons were not covered by survey, by national surveys. Our staff, based on the survey data, made some additional estimates of general scale. They are presented on this slide. And considering the fact that those separate sociological surveys conducted for the past years and other estimates of scientists prove that we can see that the growth of labor migration since 2014, and for 2016 we can assess the total figures are 2.2 million persons. It exceeds the figure of 2008, where we could see some decrease of labor migration. So the most proper and clear trend of labor migration of the past years is the increase of their scales. Due to whom we've got such increase in 2015, Ukrainian Institute of Social Research conducted the polling of socially active population of Ukraine. So we asked them whether the respondent worked abroad during the last 12 months. During the last 12 months, during the last 30 days, whether the relatives worked abroad of this respondent. It's quite obvious that the survey was conducted in Ukraine, and those people who work, who stay long-term abroad, they were not covered. There is a probability that people who travel for short-term stay, and we can say that we can make a conclusion. Then the responses to the questions on participation of work of relatives of respondents, it showed the sustainable labor migration since the 1990s. At the start of the 21st century. As for the answer to the question of the personal stay abroad, they reflect the new trends of labor migration. From this slide, you can see that if in the first case, concerning work abroad of relatives, the high intensity is in Western region. We know this region is the region of the highest intensity. The share of respondents who personally worked abroad in Western region is not higher compared to the others, but it's lower than in Kyiv. So the new wave of labor migration abroad covers residents of all parts of Ukraine and of Kyiv citizens as well. Starting since economic crisis supported by the military conflict, for many Kyiv citizens, employment in Kyiv doesn't guarantee such a level of well-being that it was till 2014. As the research showed us, among labor migrants, there is the share of youth increased. Another clear trend is strengthening of refocusing of migrants from Russia to EU countries. This process started not in 2014 and not after the conflict, but it started even earlier. If we compare the data of two national polls, we can see that the share of those who work in Russian Federation. The Russian Federation decreased by several percent. Decrease of share of those who work in Russia and EU took place till 2014. The Russian Federation became an important direction for Ukrainian migrants during the period of development of foreign labor migration, mainly because of absence of language barrier and availability of lots of relatives in the Russian Federation. And this research shows that from economic point of view, migration to Ukraine were less favorable rather than migration to the EU countries. And besides, as the national survey proved, the conditions, working conditions in the Russian Federation are worse compared to those in the EU. We can see that, in particular, more often than the other countries in the Russian Federation, the people faced the situation when the work in the Russian Federation differed from that promised, and the Russian Federation differs on the background of the other countries by share of those migrants who experienced a delay or not payment of salary. Level of salaries. Data of the second survey of 2012 and the data of level of salaries are less reliable as they received from the words of respondents. They are less reliable than about the living conditions. If we can consider, we compare the data per countries, we can see that the level of salaries in the Russian Federation is lower compared to other EU countries. According to surveys, it was a bit higher than in Poland, but if in 2012 the inhabitants, residents of Western Ukraine were traveling to Poland. And they're working in close regions of Poland, closer to Ukrainian border. As to Russia, residents of all regions, of all parts of Ukraine, they travel to Russia. And the recipients of the Ukrainian labor force in Russian regions are not the neighboring oblast regions, but St. Petersburg, Moscow, and some other regions of north of Russia. Even at some higher salary, the trip to Russia becomes less economically favorable compared to that to Poland. Based on the data of 2008, unfortunately, the similar assessment of 2012 is not available. We made assessment of distribution allocation of money transfers. We can see that if the Russian Federation at that time accumulated almost half of all Ukrainian foreign labor migrants, their share in salaries and in total volume of salaries and volume of their transfers didn't exceed 15%. Less economic benefit to Russia compared to the EU countries. It encouraged and it encourages to refocusing of some of our migrants to EU countries. It's promoted by the fact that social networking in EU countries. If in 1990s in Russia there were lots of Ukrainians had lots of friends in Russia, but now the migration networks in EU countries. The person who left there, so the individual can have some contacts in EU countries. Besides this, refocusing was promoted by legalization made by certain EU countries. This trend strengths because of worsening of Ukrainian-Russian relations and devaluation of Russian ruble compared to Polish zloty or Czech koruna and other currencies of the EU, and undoubtedly introduction of visa-free regime for Ukrainians in Schengen zone will be high impetus for many migrants who travel to Russia in order to change their mind and decision and to seek the job in EU countries. At present, the number of Ukrainian migrants just to Poland has grown. Certain analysts even say that Poland ranks first by number of Ukrainian migrants, exceeding being ahead of Russia. I still don't know. It's my personal view. I don't know the facts which would deny or confirm my opinion. I would agree with the fact that it's quite obvious that as our migrants stay in Poland, they will be seeking the job in other countries where the salary of old EU, where the salary is higher than in Poland, in Germany or other countries. Last slide, please. How the labor migration would develop in future if we are talking about number of scales. So the European focus would strengthen, would increase. What will be the scales of labor migration? It would depend on the situation in Ukraine. We mentioned a lot about economic crisis, became the most important factor. And the military conflict itself, it influenced on labor migration because of worsening of economic situation. There will be no material changes in economic development of Ukraine. First of all, we'll face strengthening of switching of short-term migration to temporary to permanent migration in EU countries. Short-term scale migration would increase, and the part of short-term migrants would become long-term migrants. These processes will take place in highest pace, with higher pace in case Ukrainian economic situation worsens. In case the well-being in Ukraine improves, we can count on termination of trend when temporary migration becomes a permanent one, and improvement of economic growth would be supported by the respective state policy. We can count on repatriation of some part of migrants into Ukraine. The short-term migration scale would decrease. Such short-term migration will not become the permanent one or long-term one. The decisive factor of the current and the future migration is economic growth, economic development. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Alexei, for such comprehensive assessment. And we have one more speaker, Anastasia Fetisova, who represents CEDOS Analytical Center. Good morning to everyone. Thank you very much to the colleagues from Europe Without Barriers who invited me to this event. My speech will be devoted to the influx of Ukrainian migration to the EU. I would focus attention on specifics of data and on a certain general context of forced migration of Ukrainians into EU. When we analyze the forced migration, we normally explain the factor of pushing. Despite the data, we know that what was the cause of this forced migration: certain political circumstances, security issues, decrease of GDP. They were the factors of pushing out. They influenced on the forced migration. But in my presentation, I would focus on the gravity factors which impacted on forced migration on one hand, and on the other hand, I would pay attention to general trends of Ukrainian labor migration to EU. And I'll try to analyze the forced migration in the context of labor migration. And from the very beginning, I would like to draw your attention to this graph. We can see dynamics of a number of applications filed to EU countries. It's an indicator of flow, a number of applications submitted during a month. And we can see that until December 2013, by December 2013, before Maidan started, was quite low, 100 applications per month. And starting from December, this number of applications started growing. In February, it's growing, and it continues growing till October 2014. In October 2014, we can see the peak of applications, 2,000 applications per month. Then we can observe a drop for some period. We can relate to Christmas holidays. January, the number of applications drop, and again, the number of applications grow. And across 2015, a number of applications remains at the level of 1,000 applications. We can see this drop in November. In our opinion, it's related to Christmas holidays. In 2016, an average number of applications remains at the level of 1,000. You can see that this decreased. We can see some drop. What was the reason? Interpreting this splash, we can see that the conditions the people have got used, and the people stopped asking the asylum in the EU. But we have some doubts concerning this logic if we pay attention to this data. And the first that confuses us is the huge number of refuses, despite the fact that half of the applications is being considered. Most of applications submitted by Ukrainians were refused, were rejected. What does it mean? On one hand, if we talk about, in general, the procedure of applications and how long it lasts in the context of migration crisis in the EU, the applications on asylum are considered quite long. The first application could be considered up to 1 year, and each applicant can appeal, and this appeal could be considered up to 1 year. Thus, up to 2 years, the Ukrainian who submitted application for asylum in the EU can legally stay in the EU country. Most likely, he doesn't have the right for job. It depends on national legislation, but he has the right for social housing, for minimal food payments and social payments as well. It's a certain factor of gravitation for Ukrainian. A large number of applications was rejected because of alternative of internal escape. The experts from the EU mentioned that most of Ukrainians who submit applications, they have this alternative of internal escape. They can feel safe themselves in other parts of Ukraine. Therefore, these applications were rejected. The large number of rejections mean refusals could be interpreted in future as a factor which would decrease a number of applicants from Ukraine. In this graph, you can see the general allocation of forms of protection provided to Ukrainians and decisions concerning asylum granting. Italy granted the largest number of. The Czech Republic was the second, and further on Germany and Poland. I would suggest to draw your attention to the countries where Ukrainians were seeking asylum. Till the start of 2014, the main countries are Sweden, Germany, Czech Republic, and France, where Ukrainians were seeking asylum. In 2014, Italy, Spain, Poland become the first ones. We can see the 5 main countries where Ukrainians were seeking asylum during the last 3 years. Size of the country is a decisive factor. The countries, according to the census of 2012 in EU, Italy, Poland, the countries which have the most number of long-term labor migrants. And due to labor migration and the previous links formed thanks to labor migration, we can say that this factor of previous links influenced on the countries where Ukrainians were seeking asylum. I'd like to draw attention to the fact that to consider this forced migration we have in the context that the general level of migration increased. We can see the positive dynamics of increase of residence permit granted to Ukrainians in 2014. The residence permits increased with the purpose of paid activity, and a number of Ukrainians increases those who travel to study. Finally, I'd like to pay attention to important element of general trends, that labor migration of Ukrainians is refocused from eastern direction to the western one. And proving this statement, I'd like to show the data from Google Trend, that the data concerning seeking in Google. And this graph, you can see a comparison of two requests, job in Russia and job in Poland. You can see that since 2014, blue is Poland and red is Russia. Since 2014, a number of requests to Google, the job in Poland increases. And then this number of requests doubles in Poland. In this context, it's quite interesting to pay attention to comparison where these requests from what regions. 2012, 2013, red the oblast regions where the people were seeking the job in Russia. Since 2014. All oblasts, all parts of Ukraine except of Luhansk, Donetsk Oblast and Crimea, these oblasts were seeking the job in Poland compared to Russia. Finally, I'd like to emphasize that it's difficult to forecast whether the number, the forced migration increases or decreases. We cannot forecast. It's difficult to forecast the conditions to be reside in Ukraine. But as for gravity factors, we can see lots of refusals, and it's one of the factors influencing on the fact that the number of Ukrainian asylum seekers would decrease. As Katerina mentioned, cancellation of short-term visas can influence on the fact that it could be a certain way when Ukrainians would travel without visas to EU countries seeking asylum afterwards. It could become a certain challenge for a visa-free regime. I would say it can become the challenge for the so-called ban for temporary return. Certain countries in EU countries, they launched this ban for Balkan countries persons who submitted lots of applications for asylum. And lots of these applications were rejected. Under certain circumstances, they can get the ban to visit these countries. Thank you very much, Anastasia, for such interesting data you provided, and forecast as well in terms of increase of asylum seekers from Ukraine and the trends available. I remember very well the example you mentioned. It was in Serbia when Roma submitted more than 100 applications for asylum, for a refugee. But this way was supported by mass media. They started talking about migration flows from Western Balkans, and it was quite negative media environment, which forced EU to refuse visa regime. But the Serbian government took some actions, and the issue was addressed. So we are returning to the issue that it's important to conduct a comprehensive awareness-raising campaign with citizens. So we still have 20 minutes left. I'd like the audience to get involved in discussions. I can see those who wish. Please introduce yourself. Your comment. I am Voskoboynik Vasily. I am the head of Association of Companies on International Employment. These questions were to most of participants. My question is to Marta Yaрошевич. The question is, Did you forecast the approximate number of people who will use Poland to Poland, who will come to Poland? But according to polls in internet, about 20% of those who responded whether you travel abroad to work using this visa-free regime. Yes, 20% confirmed. Thank you. Let's do 3 questions or comments, and afterwards we give an opportunity to speakers to give response. You have the second question. I have 3 questions. Second question is a comment to Alexei Poznikov. You used the data of sociology of 2008-2012. Then you mentioned sociology of 2015. And you mentioned that no one did separate sociology. Last year, we conducted 2 sociological surveys. They showed the migration situation. Europe and 25% of migrants to Russia, but the focus is 6% only to Russia, but 60% are focused to Europe of those who were polled, who were interviewed. Second comment was. One more question from you. I'm correspondent from Austrian TV. I have 2 questions. The first question to Marta. As we could see these trends on Balkans, where I'm working on, after we had the waves of people who were working in Slovenia or in Croatia, but now they work in Austria or Germany. The people from Bosnia and Herzegovina, now they work in Slovenia or in Croatia. After the visa-free regime mechanism is launched, shall we face a situation when Ukrainians who work in Poland, they will travel to Czech Republic, to Germany or to other countries as salary is higher? Other question is to Alexei. Do you know how many inhabitants have Ukraine as how many employed persons live in Ukraine? It's a social development. Thank you. It's clear. Let's give an opportunity to all the speakers to give responses. Perhaps we'll have another round of perhaps Marta or Alexei. Who would like to start? Thank you very much. Number 1. From the scientific point of view or from the point of view of research, we are unable to provide you with an answer. Firstly, who, in your opinion, is in the category of illegal migrants? We can talk for half an hour about methodological specifics. You asked about the visa-free regime, whether it could grow. Yes, it could grow. It can grow. It's my estimate. I'm not going to say for how much and how. I'd like to say once again that for Ukrainians who work in Poland, the most important thing is not visa-free regime, but our employment legislation. As in Poland, you can get quite quickly the permit for short-term employment, and Poland is thinking about that as the dynamics is quite high, 1.2 million of such permits. So Poland is thinking that it's a transposition of EU directive on seasonal workers, and Poland is thinking that since next year to change these rules. If these rules are toughen more strict, it could influence on employment rather than visa-free regime. That's it. Yes, I think yes. Yes, we've been discussing this issue, what we have done together. I have most results on Czech Republic. I didn't work on Germany. Yes, as in our research, we have found that Ukrainians with these Polish declarations, they travel to Czech Republic. As for Germany, Austria, so far we didn't check. Alexei, please. First of all, I'd like to say that when I was talking about 2008-2012, I was talking about all national surveys, polls conducted by National Statistics Service. It's not sociology in a classic way. It's all national polling, and their level is much higher than the level of sociological polling conducted by different institutions. As I mentioned, after 2012, we conducted some sociological surveys. I mentioned that we didn't have all national polling. Thank you for making public this data, and this data will be useful when we have just a layer of these interviews. As for national ones, since 2012 they were not conducted. In general, the quality of data collection done by State Statistics Committee after 2012 worsened, became worse. We can admit, and experts of State Statistics Service can recognize it. We don't know how many people reside in what region, in what part. Answer to your question, even till 2014 it was difficult to say how can we include into population of Ukraine the long-term external migrants, those who live abroad for many years. But the statistics of State Statistics Committee, according to the statistics, this number of people was available. A State Statistics Committee makes this data based on the number of people, those who were born, who died, and who came, who arrived and who departed. So we had the census of 2001 till 2014. The data of this 2001 census are quite obsolete under current conditions, so we can't say about quality of this data. So we plan to make a census for 2020. We'll see what the results will be. But the official population of Ukraine by State Statistics Committee in reality is a bit higher, because they don't take into account the fact there is 100,000 of long-term labor migrants, and from Donbass lots of people left abroad, mainly to Russia and to European countries. Besides the data by regions, they don't include internally displaced persons. So the real number of population also differs from the data of State Statistics Committee. Katerina, I'd like to add to your question a brief comment. Under visa-free regime, illegal migrant could be the person who will be employed but without the respective permits, without national visa. But there is a high probability that the people will use visa-free regime just to seek a job, as it's not prohibited. during 1 month, they can negotiate directly with employer and to get certain documents, come back to Ukraine to arrange all documents and not to be a legal migrant. The same concerns long-term study. In reality, those people who could be interviewed in internet, they're not representative anyhow. Anyway, they can say that they're going to work, but how they're going to work, whether they find the job, and whether they will be socially protected if they use a legal way. So I can join the comment from Marta that unfortunately we cannot forecast very specifically the figure for you. Dear colleagues, we have some time for very brief comments and questions. Very briefly. Olena Malinovska, please. Thank you, Olena Malinovska, National Institute of Strategic Research. First of all, I'd like to thank to Irina for an opportunity to meet colleagues and to hear the very competent explanations. Unfortunately, the governmental authorities didn't want to come over to listen to experts, but we enjoy speaking to each other. I have not a question, but just two aspects. Thanks to Katerina for the word synergical. It's a key word in terms of visa-free regime discussion, that all experts agreed that the situation in Ukraine is decisive for migration, but not visas, because they were scared that we will never receive these visa-free regime, that everyone would leave. It's not the visa matter. I would like to thank to Dushan for focusing us to Moldova experience. As we are not the first ones, we are not the pioneers. I was looking at the statistics on Western Balkans, on Moldova, and I can become comfortable as those people who live there. They have their permits to stay in EU decreased, and number in Albania there was a huge decrease. What Anastasia made a speech on refugees, the number of submitted applicants for asylum increased considerably, but our situation is a bit different. As Anastasia mentioned, that our refugees, asylum seekers, are mainly labor migrants who used all opportunities to get legalized. I don't think we'll have any problem in this regard. Thanks again. 1 minute, please. The question to Marta. In terms of legislative initiatives to change legislation, how they're realistic? As firstly, it was declared that since 1st of January now we are talking about the next year, whether these changes will be drafted and at what stage. This question is extremely important, and I just wanted to conclude by that. What are the specific steps in the legislation of Poland? There is still no official draft. I will send it to you. There is no official, there is a pre-final draft I can send you. It's on the web page of the Ministry of Labor of Poland, and there are some discussions ongoing. I know that since 1st January next year, it will be a case, as the European Commission requests from Poland to implement this directive on seasonal workers. It couldn't be such liberal and differ from other countries. But in the same way, it could be some complications in terms of formalities. But I believe that given such high dynamics, there could be some declarations, but after that, the Ukrainian migrants will be able to obtain these declarations as the demand for job in Poland exists. And Dushan, please.
Short comment on Moldovans, our experience. You know, we don't have so many Moldovans. We have only 5,000 of them in our country. But for them, it's very easy to get Romanian, sometimes Bulgarian, but very often they have Romanian citizenship. It means we have many Moldovans among Romanians. But we found out through our interviews that some of them, we cannot say how many, in fact, stay 3 months within the free visa regime and they irregularly work. It means it might be, but I cannot say it's 20 or 50%. It's impossible. But for sure, some of them, they will make this opportunity. Mm-hmm. We can expect that some other, representatives of other countries will do the same, but we cannot say how important it is.
Да, дякую. Шановні
Okay, dear participants of our event, our time is over. I'd like, concluding to say that although we didn't have representatives from governmental authorities, although we invited them, we'll send them all our materials, but today we'll have the meeting in the Committee on European Integration in the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine. And the subject meeting, half of experts are invited for this meeting, and we consider our roundtable as a certain platform when we exchange of views and opinions. We'll communicate, convey our opinions to the Parliament. What was mentioned today will be communicated to our MPs and to the management of the committee. Therefore, I would like to thank to everyone for participation. We would like to invite everyone for coffee break, and we'll have some networking. Thank you very much for participation. See you.